We're diving into the DataForm component of Telerik UI for .NET MAUI in this chapter. It's a very flexible tool designed for collecting or editing business object data seamlessly. The DataForm stands out with its inbuilt editors for various data types and the ability to define custom editors for a tailor-made experience. It comes with robust validation support and different commit modes for syncing edited values with the business object. You can customize nearly every aspect of your form, from the editors and groups to validation messages using the rich styling API. By the end of this chapter, you'll be fully equipped to harness the power of the DataForm to meet your specific needs. Let's jump right in. We're going to start looking at the DataForm control by examining its visual structure. In the documentation, open up Controls and then find the DataForm control and take a look at the visual structure section. Here, we're going to have a few different parts of the DataForm that you can control. The group header, the editors that are available, error messages for validation. Each editor has a header text, and then the validation summary at the end. And here are the editors that are available out of the box. There's a few different masked editors that are available for text, numbers, email, and regular expressions. There's picker editors, which have date time pickers or list pickers, or separate date and time pickers. Boolean editors like the checkbox or the switch. There's a multi-line editor, and you can also create custom editors yourself. We're not going to be going into this depth in this course, but after you've gone through this chapter, you'll be able to follow this documentation to set up your own custom editor if you need to. So where are we trying to place the DataForm? If you go to the backlog page and tap on one of the items, we'll be taken to the details page, and here we have a custom-made form. Basically, we're using labels and text inputs and pickers and a slider. Under views, backlog, and then details view, you'll find this custom-made form. We have a stack layout and then labels and editors and so on. This is fine, but we kind of have to control everything manually, set things up manually. We don't get a cohesiveness or any of the other benefits that the Telerik UI DataForm is going to give us. So we're going to replace this with the new DataForm control. I'm going to comment out the stack layout here, but we're going to keep the scroll view around. Now inside the scroll view, I'm just going to add a grid here for layout purposes, and we're only going to have one row for the DataForm. To add the DataForm, we need to add the Telerik rad DataForm control here, and of course we need that Telerik namespace up here. Great. But this form is not going to know what we're using as our model to bind to. Since we're using MVVM, we need a view model, and that's going to be under backlog and item form view model. Here it is. Basically, this is the same exact view model that we were binding earlier when we were using our stack layout for the context of all the entries that are inside that stack layout. We're going to reuse that here. So binding context equals, then we're going to use a binding to the item form VM. This item form VM is a property that lives on the details screen view model right over here. And the reason we're binding it this way is because we want to bind to a pre-existing property so that we can pass in one of our PT item instances into the view model. Because this form is not only going to display for new items, it's also going to display for existing items. So it needs to know the details about the existing item. And that's where we're passing in the item along with all the details into the item form view model. If we take a look at that class, in the constructor, we're actually checking to make sure that's not null. And then we're initializing all our local properties that we're going to bind to the properties coming from the item. Some of these are not strings, some of these are enums. Now, if we look at one of these items now, you'll see that we can't because we get an error about object must implement iConvertible. And this has to do with the way we were previously populating pickers. Regular .NET MAUI pickers require binding to strings or objects, but we are trying to bind to enums. So we had to convert all our enums to lists of strings before. Well, guess what? The Telerik DataForm doesn't require us to make that change. All these extra conversions to lists of strings for priorities and for statuses, we no longer need that. So I'm going to do a little bit of a cleanup here. We also don't need to keep track of selected item types because the DataForm will tell us what's selected. We don't need to keep track of that separately, or selected priorities or selected statuses. So we can definitely clean up our code quite a bit this way. And we can clean up the constructor to remove those selected toString methods. Now we can work directly with enums. So we have title, description, estimate, item type, which is an enum, priority, which is also an enum, and then status, which is also an enum. And these annotations are going to be used by the rad data form to display a label for each one of these properties. For example, we don't want to display item type, we want to display type next to the UI that the data form is going to generate for us. Now, since we've cleaned some of that up, we're going to need to go to this save item method in the details view model, and we're going to need to change some of these. This one's going to be item type, priority, and finally status. Looks like our project builds fine. Let's launch it and have a look. And there we are. All this UI is being generated for us automatically. We've managed to simplify not only our view model by getting rid of a lot of repetitive conversions between strings and enums, but we also have a lot less XAML. We just have the rad data form component bound to an item form view model, and that's it. We got rid of all this code in the XAML. Now, of course, we do have the ability to control a lot of this UI, which is what we're going to be going into next. But you can see what the data form generates for the different types of fields that we have, for the different types of properties that we have. Since the title is a string, we have an entry. Description is also an entry. An estimate is an integer, so we get this interface, a little stepper. Type, priority, and status are all rendered as segmented controls because they're enums. And notice that we are getting our display names displayed here for the labels instead of the property names. In this lesson, let's have a look at some of the available editors for the data form. These are the editors that are automatically generated by the data form based on the types of the properties that are part of the view model that's bound to the data form. But how can we change these or control them? Well, inside of the data form, we can specify how we want some of these editors rendered. A good example is this description field. Right now it's being rendered as a single line editor, but I want this to be a multi-line editor. So let's go over here and I'm going to add Telerik. And if you start typing DataForm, you'll see all the available editors that you can choose. And there's quite a few. I'm going to select the DataForm multi-line editor here. And then all I need to do is set the property name to description. Now description uses a multi-line editor. Now for this type editor, I don't want this to be a segmented control. I want that to be a drop-down. Let's go to our XAML and we can select the DataForm rad list picker editor. Property name will be item type. And now as part of our form, we have a list picker whenever we try to change the type. It's a modal dialog that pops up and I can change this to anything I want. And there it is. You can also change this to combo box, for example. DataForm rad combo box editor. This gives us a little drop-down UI and we can select our item type from the drop-down. We also have priority and status. Since those are both lists, we can use any of the UIs we've previously used. Or we can overspecify and be explicit about what we want. And I'm going to select the DataForm rad segmented editor for the priority field. And as you can see, priority is still being rendered as a segmented editor. There's a few different editors to pick from. You can take a look at the documentation for what's available. And don't forget, you can design your own custom editors too. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at a couple of different commit modes. And commit modes are important here because that's when the data that's internal to the data form gets written back to the view model. Basically, the data form contains a copy of the data until it's ready to be committed. And we can change the commit mode by going to the rad data form here and setting the commit mode. There's explicit, lost focus, and property changed. And it depends on your use case, what kind of commit mode you're going to use. But I'm just going to demonstrate how this works right now. If we set this to property changed, and I'm going to go to the details view model, and this is where we save the item. In other words, get all the properties from the view model and send it off to the database. I'm going to put a breakpoint right here where we examine the title, and let's run this. Now, if we go to an item here and change the title to Sticky Innovative Solutions 2, for example, and then click Save. If we examine the title, you'll see that, yes, in fact, we now have Sticky Innovative Solutions 2 as our title that we're going to send off to the database, and it's going to be saved without explicitly saying that we want to write back to the view model. Okay, let's go back to Details View and change the commit mode to explicit and run this. Now if we go to that same item, change this to 2, and then tap Save, and let's examine the title now. Uh-oh, the title does not have a 2 at the end of it. It's the old title, because we did not explicitly commit the change of the data form, the internal data of the data form, to the view model. So make sure you keep that in mind for your use case, because you might want to have explicit control of when that change happens.